Welcome to New Atlas Live. I'm Brian Berletic. Joining me today is my host and colleague, Angelo Giuliano, and also now regular guest, Rasheed from Red Pill Diaries. I will put all of their information in the video description below so you can find and follow their work and also support their work, please. And today, I think there's so much to talk about right now. There's so many things rushing ahead. We still have this supposed peace deal, the U.S. pretending to be a mediator between Russia and Ukraine when this is literally a U.S. war on Russia through Ukraine. We can get into that. The U.S. war on Yemen, an extension of a proxy war and sanctions, and the desire to go to eventual war with Iran. Continuity of agenda, by the way, under this second Trump administration. And of course, the tariffs, these global spanning tariffs that have not really spared anybody, sweeping tariffs all around the globe. And I just want to let's just show a couple of things here real quick. CNN, he presented this as these countries are putting tariffs on us, so we're going to put the same amount of tariffs, or the amount of tariffs will be related to the number of tariffs they have on us. But as it turns out, they're determining all of this by trade deficit, which is not any country's fault. It's not any other country's fault that the U.S. doesn't produce anything, shipped all of their manufacturing overseas, and now all of their companies are being out-competed by nations like China. There's also this. Ted Cruz warns Trump tariffs could be terrible for America. And he's talking about, he's also talking about a bloodbath at the next, whatever the next elections take place in the U.S., which I think we all agree that elections are meaningless. It's about public perception. But the beating the Republicans will take if the cost of living continues to spiral out of control and a recession seems imminent, I think that is a real fear. It'll create doubt in the minds of people who are even supporting Trump. And then, of course, there's this, why Trump may get away with his tariff trauma. And it's talking about pretty much all of the extremely negative and no positive outcomes for these tariffs. And what I wanted to do is kind of present my take on all of this to Angelo and Rasheed and get their reactions to this, because I hear the arguments people are making. I hear a lot of people say, it's irrational. It doesn't make any sense. Why did he do this? Why is he targeting everybody? Why did he formulate it this way? Here's a few things that I want to point out. Number one, is this really about reducing trade deficit? Is this really about reindustrializing the United States? Because if it was, there are other key fundamentals that would already need to be being addressed, such as reforming education. President Trump just eliminated the Department of Education. He's dismantling it, essentially. So that's not happening. State investment in infrastructure. The U.S. has very poor infrastructure, it's crumbling, and there is no serious plan about expanding infrastructure. Like, look at China's infrastructure, look at America's infrastructure, you'll know what I'm talking about. And so if you have no infrastructure, you have a poor education system, you don't have the human resources, you don't have the infrastructure, the natural resources, the supply chains to industrialize. How are tariffs going to do this? How's the free market just going to automatically do this itself? Now, this is my theory, because we have been talking about the U.S. obviously openly preparing for war with China, putting pressure on China in the Asia Pacific, putting tariffs, sanctions, targeting, undermining Chinese industry, China in general. And we see President Trump seizing the Panama Canal, talking about annexing Greenland to have choke points, control choke points to stop Chinese maritime shipping. I talked about the Biden administration setting this up for Trump, reconfiguring the Marine Corps to carry out anti-shipping maritime denial operations, essentially. When you put all of this together, and people told me, Brian, if America does that, because that's what that all adds up to, the worldwide interdiction of Chinese maritime shipping, that will implode the entire global economy. So when you put sanctions against everyone across the global economy, you are walling your economy off to an implosion you are planning to carry out against the global economy. You're going to destroy it. You have walled yourself off from it, not ideally, but on your own terms and ahead of time before you do this. And the analogy I want to make, and then I'll hand it over to Angelo and then Rasheed. So you have a ship, they have a ship. You tell your crew, close all the watertight compartments. We're going to ram our ship into theirs. You're going to seriously damage your own ship. They don't even think you would do this because it's so insane. When you ram into them, they're unprepared. Their ship will sink. You will be critically damaged, severely damaged, but you will still be afloat and they will be headed to the bottom of the ocean. This is where I think the United States is in terms of maintaining a global hegemony. And one more thing I want to point out is, let me share the screen here. Project 2025, again, I'm going back to this. This is the Heritage Foundation. This is the deep state, unelected corporate interests. They laid out Trump's foreign and domestic policies. Everything is here. Everything from handing the Ukraine conflict off to Europe as part of a division of labor, to preparing for war with China, streamlining USAID, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, streamlining of that all under the State Department. That is all in here. And if you go down to chapter 26, trade, and if you look at it, that's all they talk about is tariffs and as a means of basically decoupling from the rest of the world and preparing for confrontation with China to maintain American supremacy over the globe. So let's start with Angelo. What do you think about that? Could this be the U.S. walling itself off from the rest of the world before it starts imploding? It already is such a disruptive force for the emerging multipolar world. What if this is a drastic measure they feel that a last resort that they are resorting to?
Yes, absolutely. You just mentioned before a possible confrontation against Iran. There are simulations being done right now regarding the impact on inflation, those tariffs, the impact they have on the consumers in the US. It's roughly between 1% and 2%, and this is actually it's a lot. There's already an existing inflation in the US. Now you have they're sending back cheap labor. It's going to be more expensive to have local labor. Now, imagine if there was a confrontation against Iran, that means the impact would be 2-3 times the impact of the tariffs, because here we're talking about energy, and so we could, it's possible for the U.S. to have 5-6% combine, those tariffs and confrontation against Iran. So that's extremely suicidal. Now, the U.S. is using the excuse saying that the U.S. has a very low entry barrier when it comes to selling to the U.S. And actually, there are studies that says clearly that those figures are from the World Trade Organization. The average tariffs in the U.S. is 2.2%. Now, when you look at the EU, it's 2.7%, and China 3%. So U.S. is pretty much on the average. Now, when you see what Trump is saying, he's hammering like huge tariffs, and under the excuses, he come up with figures under the excuses of currency manipulation, and it's just invention. So I see he is going across the board to absolutely everybody. He's got a formula, and basically that's a project of trying to industrialize, trying to do many things. The idea, the concept itself is not wrong. It's and actually the US, it's very important for people to understand that when you look at each country, their percentage of selling of export to the US is 5-6 times in terms of importance of what the US does in their proportion of export to those countries. Sometimes it's even up to 10 times. So the US, as a coercive weapon, is in a much better position, and probably the only country that actually can hammer back equally is China, but the rest they can't. EU could eventually, but the US is playing the divide weapon. So they're trying to go against, to negotiate on individually on all those countries. Now the rationale itself, I do think that they might be able to grab hundreds of billions here and there, but mainly on the allies. But this is a cheap, it's a short term, it's a cheap move, but you do it only once. And what the countries are going to do, this is going to actually accelerate multipolar world, because those countries, they will need to hedge. The US was their largest partner. Now they need to hedge. It's not reliable anymore, and we need to have other markets. So isolation, this is going to be a process of isolation.
Okay, and Rasheed, what do you think about not just the tariffs in general, but this idea of walling yourself off from the rest of the world to then try to just disrupt and destroy everything, and in the hopes that you're the last one standing? Does that make sense, or is there something else at work here?
That's exactly my thoughts on it. You know, I was talking to my son earlier before the show, and he gave me a quote in describing the thinking of Donald Trump and his administration, and it's directly from Sun Tzu. And the quote is this: "An evil man will burn down his own nation to the ground to rule over the ashes." And that's what we're seeing. I thought that was a real apt quote about what's going on, because the walling off of America, you have to understand, we go back to time. The United States understands that there's no mathematical possibility for the U.S. to pay off its debts. It knows that that with every day that passes, they're falling behind China in multiple areas. They see the reemergence of Russia. They see a rising tide of nations like Iran and other medium to small nations bucking up against the United States. Because remember, 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have never seen a nation Iran size just openly go against the United States because of the fear of retaliation. And now they see that there's a domino effect going on. So with that said, the reason I put that that quote there is because when we look at the moves and the policies of Trump, they're throwing things now up against the wall because time is not on their side. Economics is not on their side. So they're saying, hell, everything is going to collapse. Well, we're certain that our economy is going to implode because of the debt situation. So it's all or nothing right now. Let's just do it. Let's just hedge off. This is the best option out of all of the bad options. So let's use this, and hopefully we can throw this up against the wall, and this will stick just a little bit longer to give the empire time to rest, recalibrate, and rearm, and try to come through the ashes and be the last one standing so that they can dominate again and try to fashion a new order after America's liking again.
Yes, and I wanted to ask Angelo, what you said this is a one-off attempt. You can do this one time. You're not going to get away with this again, and they can make all of this extra money, which is compelling. That's a compelling explanation. I just wanted to put this out here for consideration. Look at what the U.S. did locally to Taiwan and chip manufacturing. They created this crisis between Taiwan and the rest of China. They're creating what is almost certainly an inevitable conflict that threatens the existence of chip manufacturing facilities there. They have entire papers where they're talking about a scorched earth strategy of just destroying everything so China cannot get access to it. So that is how they're going to save Taiwan, is by completely destroying everything on Taiwan. They coerced TSMC to move its facilities over to Arizona. And when they tried to do this, they realized that the supply chain, the infrastructure, the human resources necessary to run these facilities efficiently do not exist. They had to bring half of the workforce from Taiwan is from Taiwan. They had to bring them over and permanently base them in the United States. And so they're trying to get adjusted to that because there are no Americans that can do these jobs. And so that's one example. The other example is from before 2014. I've talked about this many times. In Europe, things were going very well. They were cooperating with Russia. They were getting cheap energy from Russia. German industry was humming along. They were connecting together with China. There was this back and forth going on. And then the U.S., again, created a geopolitical conflict right in the middle of Europe, in Ukraine, overthrowing the Ukrainian government, putting a client regime into power, and then militarizing Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia, creating a situation where eventually sanctions were imposed on Russia. That was cutting off Russian energy. And then the US just literally blew up the Nord Stream pipelines to cut them off completely. And so then the cost of energy skyrocketed across Europe, and industry there was no longer viable. So then we had German companies transplanting their operations from Europe, again, to the United States. And so I think the United States said, what if we could do this on a larger scale? How could we do that on a larger scale? And I think they looked at tariffs and war together as two options to achieve this on a much larger scale. And again, it's just like Rasheed is saying, they're at a time China is surpassing all of the West. What can we do? What can we do basically to just flip over the game board and void this game and come out on top in their minds? Of course, I don't think it'll work, but I think that is their idea. Angelo, that and anything else you want to add to this particular topic of tariffs?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that there's no planification. When you look at if it was China in the position of the US, they would do planification of what is missing, especially in terms of infrastructure, the whole supply chain. And because it's capitalistic and extremely, very much market oriented, they think that everything will follow. So you're throwing something like this, and you say like we want to reindustrialize, and everything will follow. It's not like this. You need to do planification. That means in terms of science, math, technology, all those people that come from those fields, study fields. You do not build up those industries that disappeared the last 20 years overnight. That takes decades. So that's a very desperate attempt. But ultimately, you see, they're panicking. Imagine, this is either if there's war or not. Imagine if there's no war, but there's de-dollarization. That would mean that the US would not be able to afford the standard of living they had. And one of the best ways to reindustrialize, you need to bring it back because you cannot afford to have that standard of living. And they're just panicking, and they're going across the board. So you see, why, when you look at they've been sanctioning all of them, and it's basically related to the tariffs level they have, and also the trade deficit they have against those countries. And there's no actually they didn't do any segregation. This is a special ally or so on. They're going across the board because they have no choice, and but it's a panic, and there's no plan for that. So I see the two things. One is actually war. One is even just the decline. You want to get ready for the decline because it's a financialized economy. I don't know if you guys saw the interview of Tucker Carlson of Scott Bassett. And actually, he's saying himself, he acknowledged that the US is an empty economy. It has become a financialized economy. It needs to be able just to go back to produce tangible goods. And the problem is that because the leadership of the US, they all come from, they are lawyers, the financial industry, they do not produce anything. And those are the leadership. And because of the structure of the economy, you have much more incentive in the US to go into Wall Street than to become an engineer. As opposed to China, the levels of salaries for engineers are often higher than people in banks. And those are the structural problem you have in the US, because people, they'd rather be paid higher wages and produce nothing than doing very hard work as an engineer and struggling.
Yes. In the United States, it is an entire paradigm that has taken hold and infected society. And this wasn't as if the American people chose to do this. One moment, Rasheed, I just want to show this because somebody in the comment section was talking about how the factory in Arizona was the most advanced factory TSMC has, and it only took 2 years and everything is working perfect. And this is just the beginning of this year. The U.S. plant is unlikely to get latest chip tech before Taiwan. And all throughout this article, they're talking about all the problems they're having in the United States trying to set this up. and the fact that they had to bring hundreds and hundreds of workers from Taiwan to run it because Americans could not do the job. So I just wanted to point that out. And it's easy for people to sit there and cheerlead, from a perspective of fantasy, but in reality, this is what's actually going on. This is the CEO saying this. So it's not me saying it. It's not some anti-American. This is Reuters publishing this. So this is the reality. It will take the United States to reindustrialize. It will take them, because he said it doesn't take decades. Trump's been talking about this since his first term. So it's almost a whole decade. It still hasn't happened. Rasheed, go ahead. You can react to Angelo or add anything else you want to this topic of tariffs.
Yeah, the tariffs. I mean, the relocation of companies back to the United States. People don't understand that they have to be skilled. They have to have an educated base. That's what China did. They started educating their base, and they became more proficient at what they do. You just don't, some of this stuff, you just can't flip a switch and then they come back to the United States and be productive. We saw that in India, as the United States tried to hedge its best bets against China and move some of the factories to India, and realized that they were taking losses. So the corporations themselves had to come to an understanding with the United States government. Hey, we have to shut these plants down. We've been here for 3, 4, 5 years. We've got to go back to China. We're not making any headway. And so they took that chance and they lost in India, realizing that they had to come back to China, because even India didn't have the proficiently skilled workers to do certain things in certain industries. And as you said, this will take decades and not years, even though people say that it'll take years and not decades. I don't think they understand the skill level of certain things and the educational level. This is not going into McDonald's and flip, even though you have to have skills there. This is not going into McDonald's, being trained for a week and then becoming proficient. These things take months and years to do. And the United States doesn't have months and years for this because of her debt burden. It goes back to her debt burden. This is why her war plans are being pushed up against Iran. This is why she's now contemplating walling her economy off for a suicidal mission against China, because she understands that the time is against her economically. She's kicked down the economic can down the road for decades, and now we're at a dead-end street.
Yes, absolutely. And something else that came to mind while you were talking, Rasheed, was U.S. arms manufacturing for 3 years. So not 2 years. And we're not talking about building new factories. The U.S. has many existing arms factories. Just expanding production has completely failed over the course of now 3 going on to 4 years regarding this, not just the war, the U.S. war on Russia through Ukraine, but also delivering all the weapons they're trying to pour into places like Taiwan for a war with the rest of China. So when I see these comments, this is wishful thinking, fantastical thinking. That is not how America is going to solve their problems. They need to face reality. They need to look at what is really going on. And they need to, first of all, they have to ask themselves, what are they trying to achieve? And I'm looking at Project 2025, and they're talking about maintaining America's position as the world's greatest superpower when they're less than 5% of the global population, smaller population than China, smaller industrial base. We were just talking about millions more graduating, STEM graduates graduating in China than the US. How are you the most powerful nation? And why can't you just accept that you are smaller than China? China's time has come. Just accept your place within the world and the fact that you can no longer impose yourself upon the world. That is rational. And to fight this with this zero-sum confrontation mentality is, as you say, Rasheed, it's suicidal. Do either one of you have anything else you want to talk about regarding the tariffs before we start talking about? I want to. Yeah, go ahead, Angelo. Go ahead.
I'd like to add one. That's a topic. I mean, you probably know about this, but a lot of people, when they hear us, they think, you pro-Russia, pro-China, and so on. And actually, it's exactly the opposite. My biggest frustration is that you have, because of arrogance in the West, they're doing the mistake of undervalue the rest of the world. because that there's a sense of superiority, and that's my frustration. It's because, well, we could be so much better. And I wish the best for the US. Even though I'm honest, I'm transparent. I hate this sense of superiority of like people like bumping their chest, and you know who I'm meaning. Brian, you and we've been talking about this, but this whole thing about, oh, we have the strongest army and we need to show the world that how good we are, and so on. And that's annoying. But I don't wish any bad. Really, I don't wish any bad things. What frustrates me, it's this arrogance that makes people ignorant. When you're arrogant, you become ignorant. You start, that's the foundation. The foundation of a strategy is know yourself and know your enemy. They do not even know themselves, and that is the problem. And the other problem is that they are powerful and they can harm the rest of the world. If they were stupid on their own, that's okay. I mean, that is okay, right? But you need to be a responsible power. And now, if you're using force like this, and you get frustrated like a baby that didn't get his a small kid that didn't get his toy and is no more the first in the class, and then you want to burn the whole class, and that's the behavior, and that's my frustration. It could be better. The US, I'm fine with the US doing well. Why should I be pro-China? Tell me. I have no, I'm happy in China and they treat me well, and I don't want to paint the place beautiful, but I have no critics about it. You see my point? And I have no reason to tell lies, I feel that in some ways I do like more the West than most Westerners that are warmongers, and they are arrogant, and they don't see that the only path is the multipolar world. I do believe that it's the same as if you have a friend who's is drunk, and if you're a good friend, you take the keys and you reason him, right? You just don't tell him you're the best one, and that's what those warmongers are doing.
Yes, Rasheed, do you have anything else you want to add to the topic on tariffs? I want to get into.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was saying before, when the United States introduced the idea of placing tariffs on Mexico and on Canada, that this was a curveball, and the idea was to go after China. And just like I said, what is it? 54% tariffs, because 34, and then the 20 that they already put on them. This is a stealth attack against the Chinese economy, seeing that if they can bring any harm to China or make China yield to some concern, to some demands from the United States. All while you have to understand also that there's no honor among thieves. And the United States has been one of the greatest robber nations on the planet. And so when we look at what's going on in Germany and what's going on in Europe, America doesn't care. This is what people need to put in their mind. The American elite does not care about whether you're deindustrialized. It does not care about massive unemployment growing across Europe. What it cares about is the bottom line, is American hegemony. And if they have to sacrifice you through tariffs, through wars, through sanctions, then they are willing to make you their sacrificial lamb. And that's what I'm saying. All of this is a part of trying to, again, that quote that I said about Sun Tzu, all of this is about burning down the world in hopes that you can rule over the ashes. Because if they allow the world to continue the way it is, they understand that they will be outcompeted, and they will no longer be the hegemon, and this is unacceptable to them. And they will no longer control the international organizations or the levels of power over the world through the dollar currency regime, which is world's reserve currency, and that's the life's blood of the empire. And that's also a way that the United States can export inflation and live above their means. They have ruled so long. They have this, I call it the king syndrome, where you have ruled so long that you become arrogant and drunk in your rule, especially when you see a new kingdom over the horizon saying, hey, listen, we're not going to take your dictates, and if war is forced upon us, then we'll go to war. And the Western leaders are saying, hell, what do we have to lose? We're losing our position anyhow. Let's just go at it. And maybe we can come out on top. And I think that is the thinking of the elite.
Absolutely. I think it's the perfect segue into talking about the peace negotiations with Russia, between the US and Russia, regarding Ukraine, and just the whole situation that Europe has found itself in the middle of. A lot of people say, well, this is and they're right. I mean, that Ukraine is a US proxy war with Russia, but it isn't just Ukraine. It extends across all of Europe. All of Europe has been roped into it, and all of Europe is paying the price. Just as you say, Rasheed, the US is feeding all of Europe into this proxy war, and they're out of Ukrainians, and now they're openly talking about sending European troops into Ukraine. And it's not, oh, Europe's doing this on their own to sabotage Trump. No, Trump's Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, I hate to keep going back to this, he publicly, very clearly said to Europe, you are sending these troops into Ukraine as peacekeepers, as part of guaranteeing any sort of ceasefire. And so you're absolutely right. They are willing to sacrifice all of Europe, Canada, everything. And look at every juncture the U.S. finds itself at. Who is paying the price for their policies? Is it ever Washington or Wall Street? Or is it always absolutely everyone else, including the American people? I always say the American people are among the first victims of U.S. empire. Although it's hard to say that when you're looking at Palestine or Yemen right now, or the situation in Ukraine. I mean, it's seriously victimized, and to such an extreme extent. But I just wanted to go over a few updates here real quick. Russia is hitting Ukraine with an unprecedented number of missile and drone strikes. They're avoiding energy infrastructure because they, in principle, agreed to that energy ceasefire with Trump, and because they only usually do that once a month anyway. But by the way, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, I thought they were dismantled. This is from today. So how's that happen? It's almost as if they lied to us and they just consolidated it all under the State Department, just like Project 2025 said. I don't know. And then the New York Times is talking about Russian missile and drone bombardment. It is expanding. And this is the Kiev Independent. 23 missiles and 109 drones overnight. And they're admitting that Ukraine could only intercept 40-something out of these over 100 drones. So their air defenses are still in a state of collapse. Remember, they were saying they were taking out all of the more missiles and drones than Russia even claimed that they were firing during these volleys. And then what else was there? And then Ukrainian drones hit Russian explosives fiber optic factory near Moscow. Now this is what I really wanted to get to, because hold on, let's add Scott. Scott is his expertise is this conflict in Ukraine, so we'll get his take on this. Perfect timing, Scott. So how is Ukraine able to strike these targets deep inside Russia? And I just want to go over these 3 articles from New York Times. This was from last year, the spy war, how the CIA secretly helps Ukraine fight Putin. And they admit from 2014 onward, not 2022 onward, 2014 onward, the CIA took over Ukraine's intelligence agencies. They are running Ukraine's intelligence agencies. They are running Ukraine's military decision-making. And then we have this one. When is this from? But this is, again, the secret history of the war in Ukraine, the untold story of America's hidden role in Ukrainian military operations against Russia's invading armies. And they admit every single aspect of everything Ukraine is doing is enabled by the United States. And then here, key takeaways from America's secret military partnership with Ukraine, because it's much deeper than the U.S. leads on. They act as if they're not a party to this war, when in reality, they are fighting this war and they are doing it through Ukrainian intermediaries. This is a U.S. war on Russia, and and people will talk about these articles even right now, and then they act as if, well, somehow this has magically changed under the Trump administration, even though they admit this is still taking place. Ukraine is still able to reach targets deep inside Russian territory because the U.S. is enabling it every step of the way. So maybe we'll go in reverse. We'll start with Scott since he just showed up, and then we'll go to Rasheed, and then Angelo. What is your take on the current status of the so-called peace talks? Before you came in, Scott, we were talking about how, and you know my position on this anyway. This is just U.S. stalling for time. They want to corner Russia, get them into a ceasefire, and freeze the conflict so they can take care of Iran and China in detail, and then circle back around to Russia. What is the latest from your perspective, Scott?
Well, I mean, over the past month, I think it's become relatively clear that the Russians are at least seeing through some of what the West is proposing. I've talked about this on my stream a bunch, but I don't know exactly who's running and controlling foreign policy right now in terms of Europe and the Middle East. But as the West is attempting to get a ceasefire in Ukraine, during the exact same period as they're trying to transition potentially to the Middle East and to China, you watch two ceasefires collapsing and not being abided by the West, who, is for all intensive purposes at least ethnic cleansing, but likely committing a genocide in Gaza. So the Russians are looking at this, and you're saying, well, you obviously just lied about the ceasefire in Gaza. You went back on that immediately, unilaterally collapsed that ceasefire. You have never stopped striking Lebanon. So why would Russia be in a position to go into potentially a Minsk 3 sort of deal, especially when Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 went the exact same way that the ceasefires in the Middle East have just collapsed? I mean, you're looking, from my position, when you're talking about negotiating with the U.S., it's the best decision to make is almost just to not do it at all. And I think that's what Iran is doing right now. They've kind of put their foot down, and basically they're saying they're not going to do any direct negotiations with the United States. And this is also seems to be the path that China's taking, and Russia has been taking this path for the last 3 or so years, I would say. And it's kind of shocking to me, honestly. I don't think at a single point throughout my life, I'm younger than all of you guys, I believe, I have never seen the U.S. actively be told no across the board like this. And I think that it's really beginning to show the immaturity of U.S. foreign policy and just the U.S. political elite. We just saw Marco Rubio come out today and basically stomp his feet around and protest about how Russia isn't, taking the negotiations seriously, this, that, and the other. Meanwhile, like Brian said, the U.S. is still actively supplying strike data to the Ukrainians for both HIMARS and Ukrainian deep strikes into Russia. Don't know how that perpetuates a ceasefire in any way. They are still actively delivering immense amounts of equipment and ammunition that continue to get Ukrainians killed and Russians killed every day. Doesn't really lend credence to any sort of ceasefire. And further than that, just you can listen to any of their talk. I mean, Brian always talks about Pete Hegseth. I've beat this horse dead. I can't talk about it anymore. On February 5th in Brussels, he talked about the division of labor, and nothing has varied from that original statement. They are following this track perfectly, and it doesn't appear to be any off ramps, any choice. And I would just like to say this to all of the people who are the big Trump supporters and Trump fans. Trump is systematically continued every single Biden era foreign policy decision, including striking Yemen, including the armament of Israel to strike Lebanon and Gaza, and the continued armament of Ukraine. So that's your non-interventionalist candidate right there.
Again, he did it again.
Yep.
That he did that the first 4 years, and now he's doing it all over again. Hate to say it, but I told everybody so.
And I just would like to point out that the two illustrations of the U.S. strikes in Yemen working were potentially on some sort of, I'm not going to say they weren't combatants because I have no idea. It's a drone footage, black and white in the sky. But in Yemen, they tend to do these tribal circles, and that's exactly what this looked like. And when it was struck, the president comes out and brags about how he killed 70 people. In what, I mean, if he said something about them getting orders, like they met out in the sand to get orders on what ships to strike or something like that. I know how U.S. drone operations work, and I bet you there were a significantly more number of civilians in that circle than there were militants. Not only that, take it back a week, and you have the signal chat leak where they're openly bragging about collapsing an apartment building to kill a single human being. And it's just like this immense hypocrisy that to then go over to like the Ukraine situation where we just had a situation developing Kryvyi Rog where a Russian missile was potentially shot down. And
my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a